So in this presentation, we're going to be looking at sociolinguistics. Sociolinguistics is about how social variables affect the way that we speak. So depending on your background, your ethnic background, your educational background, your socioeconomic background, your racial background, your gender, all of those different variables that make up society can have effects on the way that we speak, and here we're going to be specifically looking at the way that we swear. So here are some variables, and this isn't an extensive list or an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty good start. Age, race, ethnicity, education, socioeconomic class, gender, and then I've got the etc. to illustrate that there are other factors as well. Religion might be a factor, for example. Age. Now, as you can probably guess, this is going to affect how we swear, and you can probably make a pretty good hypothesis of who swears the most in, say, the United States. I think probably most of us would guess that teenagers are going to be the ones who swear the most, and the research seems to bear that out. Now, I should add that there really isn't all that much good, solid research in this area, but what there is seems to bear that out. Now, what's surprising, though, is that when you get to the high end, to the elderly, you find that the amount of swearing starts to pick up again. That it's the middle class that has the least amount of swearing, whereas the elderly actually tend to swear fairly frequently. And as we saw in the previous module about language in the brain, in fact, if you were to go to old age home, you find a lot of swearing. Now that's due to senile dementia and other factors as well. But we do find that even before brain damage may set in, people, as they get older, tend to be looser with their swearing. And that's probably because they're no longer striving. In the middle age is when you're really trying to establish yourself in your career and in society and so on. And you don't need to do that as much once you're older. And then, of course, the very young don't need to worry about that as much either. Race, clearly this is going to be a factor, although I'm not aware of a whole lot of research in this with regard to swearing. There's some, but I think that we can all make a pretty good intuitive hypothesis that there are going to be differences between races in terms of what swear words are used, how frequently, and etc. But again, there's not a whole lot of research that's gone into that area. Ethnicity, likewise, would be another area that we would expect to see differences. Certainly we know that ethnicity can lead to differences in speech styles. So if we look at speech in general, we're going to find differences. So we would expect that there's going to be differences in swearing as well. It's just there's not that much research into ethnicity and swearing. Education, again, something that we could make some pretty good hypotheses about. The uneducated, we would probably guess that they're going to swear more than the educated. Now, as it turns out, from, again, a scant amount of research, there's some research to suggest that the highly educated actually swear more than the people in the middle. And again, that probably has to do with some issues of striving. Socioeconomic class, so it shows a similar pattern. People at the lower end are going to swear more than people in the middle, and probably more than people at the very top. But the people at the very top tend, again, to swear more than the people in the middle class. Now, as I've said, none of this is based on a great deal of evidence, so this is all fairly preliminary in terms of the findings. Gender is the one area that has been studied fairly extensively, and for quite some time linguists have been making comments about gender and swearing, and about the men's style of swearing versus women's style of swearing. But it's not until fairly recently, in the last few decades, that some serious research has been done on this. Before it was more speculative, and now we've actually seen some substantial research being done in this area, which is great. And so because of that, we are going to be focusing in this module on gender and swearing and what we can find out about it. So I'm going to be asking some questions as we go, and I want to think about the answers to these questions and how we could formulate a hypothesis based on the answers, and then how we would test it. So, for example, do men and women swear the same amount? Well, I think all of you have some pretty good intuitions about that and what would be your answer based on your own experience. So you can make a good hypothesis. So a question, of course, is not a hypothesis. You have to answer the question to have a hypothesis. So we would start by answering it. Now, some of you probably would say that men swear the same amount as women. That, it's pretty much equal. Others of you would probably predict that men swear more than women. And that's actually what most people historically have hypothesized, and that's what most people who've taken this class in the past have hypothesized. Virtually nobody that I know of has said that they believe that women swear more than men. And that's kind of telling. Okay, now, so let's make that as a hypothesis. Men swear more than women. But obviously, that's something that we would need to test, to demonstrate, right? Any hypothesis is just a hypothesis. We need to provide evidence to support it or to show that it's problematic and needs to be rethought. Now, we're going to be, in the following presentation, coming back to that and seeing what the research actually demonstrates for this question. Another question, sort of a related one, is do men and women use the same taboo words with the same frequency? So it's one question to ask, do men swear more than women? It's another question to ask, do men use the same taboo words with the same frequency as women? Now, here we might get a somewhat different answer compared to number one. But again, the idea is that we want to come up with a specific answer to this. And for a question like this, the more specific that we can be, the better, to make it testable. So here what you would want to do is say, choose a number of words that you would hypothesize about. So we could make the hypothesis that men use the word fuck more frequently than women do. Or that women use the word damn more frequently than men do. Those are testable hypotheses, right? So that's how we want to do it, is to make it as specific as we can so that we can actually test them. Another question would be, are there taboo words that most men would never use, that seem to be off limits for men? And then a related question would be, are there taboo words that most women would never use? Are there taboo words that are off limits for women? And again, for our hypothesis, we would want to be very specific about it. So we might predict that, for example, women do not use the word cunt. And we might predict that men do not use the word boobs. Now again, this is statistical. We're not saying that all men avoid the word boobs and that all women avoid the word cunt, but rather that are we finding in general that women avoid cunt and in general men avoid boobs? These are hypotheses. Another one, this was one that was actually proposed by a student some years ago in the class. She phrased it as a question to begin with. Are girls and boys treated equally when it comes to punishment for swearing? And she was interested in this because she had a hypothesis. Her hypothesis, based on her own experience, was that boys are treated more leniently than girls, that girls are punished more harshly for swearing than boys are. And so she was interested in knowing whether that was true, in the larger society. So this was her own experience in her own family, and she wanted to actually be able to test it and provide empirical evidence that we find this throughout society. The last one that we'll think about is, are people equally tolerant when it comes to males and females swearing? And again, I think that most of us would probably predict that men are sort of seen as being, it's more acceptable, I should say, that men swear than it is for women to swear. And that is that when women swear, people look down on that more. They're less tolerant of it. Again, this is a hypothesis. This is what I think most people would predict in this class. But it's something that we would need to test. And we would have to find specific ways of getting at it. And that's what your challenge is going to be. Within your posse, I want you to choose a question and come up with a hypothesis and come up with a way of testing it. Now, you don't have to actually do the testing, but I want you to think about how you would design a test for your hypothesis. So this is going to be a thought experiment. Okay, so I'll leave you to that, and then the next presentation is going to address that first question about whether or not men actually do swear more than women.